Welcome to the Brainrich Podcast. Today we're thrilled to welcome Nick Solter, a dedicated advocate for dyslexia awareness and a co-host of the Dyslexia Journey podcast. Nick brings his personal experience as a parent of a dyslexic teen, offering valuable insights and strategies for navigating the complexities of dyslexia. Join us as we delve into his journey, the challenges families face, and the powerful ways we can support neurodivergent children. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Nick, I would like to start, if you can break down what dyslexia is for some people who still, they may have heard, but just may not be aware completely. What is it? And if you can help us to understand it better.
Sure. And just as a disclaimer to start, I'm not a psychologist or a medical doctor or a teacher. So I'm not an expert in any of the particular fields, but I have learned a lot about dyslexia through our journey with our daughter. And so I will present my understanding of what dyslexia is. There's a technical definition, which is in order to be diagnosed with dyslexia, and it's actually the term dyslexia is not used in the diagnosis. And what it is, it's diagnosed as a, quote, specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. And that is from the DSM, which is the standard diagnostic manual for psychiatric and psychological conditions. And so a couple things of interest here. One is that they don't actually use the term dyslexia. And that two, it doesn't really tell you that much, like specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. Like, what does that really mean? So everyone, I think, is maybe, or maybe not everyone, but most people, when we talk about dyslexia, the first thing that they think about is, oh, okay, you reverse letters or you read words backwards or something like that. That's the standard, like in the, what people tend to think of. And that's not totally wrong, but that's not totally right either. So it's not really just about reversing letters or reading words backwards. Some dyslexic people do that. Not everybody does. It's also not limited to reading. So the most interesting thing that I've learned through this journey is that dyslexia is a whole brain difference. And there actually have been studies which have been able to show that there are brain differences in dyslexic kids that are observable at birth. And so with imaging studies. And so we obviously don't know the kids are dyslexic yet at birth, but we can later match that to when we do notice that they're dyslexic. So it does make it generally more difficult for people to learn to read and write and spell fluently, especially in English, which is a very difficult language that is not consistently phonetic. And so that makes dyslexia, I think, more apparent than in some other languages that are easier to learn and more phonetic. But it also, like I said, it's a whole brain difference. So it really, there are, as well as the so-called negative traits, making it harder to read and write, there's actually a lot of positive traits that go along with it. So people with dyslexia are generally, they have stronger visual spatial skills. They are generally better creative thinkers, outside the box thinkers. They often are able to make connections between disparate ideas that other people who are not dyslexic are not able to make. And so it's a really fascinating thing to think about, that dyslexia, again, as a whole brain difference, is not something that we can talk about curing, or it's not something that we talk about fixing. And so the term that we generally use is we can remediate. So we can help children with dyslexia or adults with dyslexia learn to read and write better. And that's the sort of remediation. But dyslexia as a brain difference is something that's going to be with you for your whole life. It's not, there's no fixing it, there's no curing it, there's no medication that helps. It's just a different brain makeup along the spectrum of human diversity.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the explanation. Nick, can you share a little bit of your personal journey?
Yeah, so it's definitely been a bit of a long journey, a struggle, and started when our daughter was in first grade, which in the US, it's usually when you're age six to seven. And she had gone to school before that. She went to preschool and then to kindergarten, which was age 5. But they don't really focus on reading so much. You don't really notice at that age. But then in first grade is when they really start focusing on reading. And she really was struggling to learn to read. And also during that year of first grade, she was really not happy in school. She was starting to feel really, I think, maybe different from the other kids. She was starting to feel stupid. She was starting to feel that she was not other subjects. She started doing worse in, actually. She was actually regressing in math and things like that. It was really just a bad environment. And we didn't know what was going on. We weren't familiar, neither my wife or I is dyslexic. We weren't super familiar with it. We maybe thought at the time, oh, well, maybe she'll just learn to read a little later. But we were worried about how how it was affecting her self-esteem. And so we ended up pulling her out of school and homeschooling her for kind of the end of first grade and then most of second grade. So that was basically when she was 7. And we still didn't know she had dyslexia. For her third grade year, we actually moved out of the country, unrelated to her learning difficulties, but we spent the year living in Geneva, Switzerland. And we enrolled her in a private school there that was a bilingual French English school. And interestingly, the change of environment, like really doing something so different, actually helped her. She enjoyed that year in school. She, I think, started to feel more confident about herself because she, like, obviously French was hard, but she was the best in English class. And it was actually a really good year for her. We still didn't know she had dyslexia. We came back to the US and we found actually a private school for her. And in that next year, when she was in fourth grade, we started to think seriously about dyslexia. And we did an independent assessment. It was like a two day thing where she took a bunch of intelligence tests and various kinds of tests. And then they did say, okay, she definitely has dyslexia. So we had the official diagnosis and we knew. Now she's 17 in her last year of high school. And she's been doing great. She's been in a public high school for all of high school. She still doesn't read as fast as other people, and she doesn't write as fast as other people when she's writing by hand. But because she's been officially diagnosed, are able to get accommodations for her in school. She gets longer to take tests. She's able to type instead of write by hand. She's able to use audiobooks, things like that. And so with those accommodations, she's able to do quite well in school, which is great.
Wow. So going back into her early years, when you start noticing, okay, maybe something is wrong as she was getting older, was it affecting you how you were with your daughter? Were you trying to find different ways to teach her letters? Because there are like multiple programs, you can do multiple approaches and stuff. I'm just trying to figure out if a parent right now goes through the same thing, if it's a
Yeah.
younger child, is there maybe a specific program or tool that you find out was working better at a time? Or is it something that you found that is completely unique and you figure out your own way? You broke the system.
Right. That's a great question. There are reading or literacy curricula that are designed for dyslexia or that work really well for dyslexic kids. We did not know about that, so we didn't use any of those. But I will say for anyone who's listening who might be wondering about it, the Orton-Gillingham approach is, I think, considered really strong for dyslexia. What we've done since birth is read to her. She loves story and there's a great sense of that. And then I guess, mostly tried to work on the sort of whole word approach with her. The research seems to show now that phonics-based approaches are better in general. It's probably true that one needs a combination of both. We just continued reading to her. She did learn to read. Again, she reads slower than other people on average, but yeah, she's definitely capable now.
Going back to that two different types of approaches, so Domin Institute, they really advocate for the whole word approach.
Mm,
Are you familiar with Domin Institute?
no.
So Domin Institute, they've been around since 1960, I think. We had a podcast episode with them. So Glenn Doman, the founder of the program, his grandson is overtaken right now, Spencer Doman. He's really good. You can find him on Instagram and stuff. What they do, because they also look at the whole brain approach, right? For kids with the autism, with ADHD and other developmental issues. So they found that the whole word approach for those kids that works much better. They advise to start as early as even 6 months old. So
Hmm.
what you can do, you can show that card for a second long, right? So you start, they group in words by meaning, right? So if it's animal, you just go to a child that says, okay, right now we're going to talk about animals. And it goes like a dog, a cat,
Uh-huh.
like you name it, like a frog or something like that. So 5 words, 5 seconds per one category, right? And then you take a little break and then you go back to another set of words. So in a day, you show about 3 sets of words, but you show them multiple times a day. And you rotate those sets like every week. They have a special, like they have a program. Every week you take out some of the sets, and then you replace with the new ones. And
Hmm.
then you go a word and a picture, a word and a picture. It's a way different from the phonics system, but it works really well for kids with neurodivergent disorders.
Yeah, we had someone on our show recently. Her name is Kim Para. She's a teacher in, I think, Alabama now. She also was in Florida, who has a method that she calls the flash method, which is pretty similar, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty unique. I tried my son, my youngest son, he's 2 years old. I'm guilty not being consistent. He doesn't have any neurological disorders, but I think whatever works for kids with some neurological disorders, it would works for well kids as well, right?
Mhm.
So I started going with him, and it's really fun because he looks at those cards and he can concentrate for a short period of time, right? So he goes, and I think it's fun. Besides growing his vocabulary, showing different words, he recognizes the meaning and he can correlate the words and what I'm saying. It's pretty cool. Yeah, those are really nice. So when you first found out that you have to deal with the dyslexia, what was your initial reaction? How you cope with that? And maybe what can you suggest to other parents?
Sure. So I think as a parent, it's natural to be worried about your child, obviously. And the number one tip that I could give is to trust yourself as a parent. And so let me sidetrack a little bit. Dyslexia is not correlated with intelligence. The standard bell curve of intelligence is the same for dyslexic kids as for non-dyslexic kids. I really hate this term, but I'll use it here for lack of a better one, especially in gifted kids who are dyslexic. They'll find ways to compensate pretty quickly. So, like in our daughter's case, when she was in early school, first grade, she relied on her memory quite a bit to the extent where she would actually memorize the picture books. If she was supposed to be learning to read a picture book, she would actually have us read it to her and then memorize it and then be able to recite it from memory, like to her teacher or to the class.
Wow, that's pretty
Right?
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and they just develop this sort of as just instinctually almost. And dyslexia often gets hidden. Sometimes you might even hear the term stealth dyslexia. And so kids with dyslexia aren't necessarily failing, or they don't call it failing in first grade, but they're not necessarily even at the bottom percentile of reading progress. Like they might be average in reading even. And so I think that's what the school was not worried about our daughter. They thought she was just fine because she was maybe average, but we knew as parents that something wasn't right.
Mhm.
So trust your instinct as a parent. If there's a disconnect, if there's a discrepancy, if your child is very intelligent and curious and creative at home, but even if they're not doing terrible in school, but if they're just average in school, that's a difference. And that
Mhm.
is something to possibly look into.
Mhm. Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much. Going back to navigating the school system, how would you suggest to advocate for your child's needs within the school system? And what advice would you give to parents?
Sure. Let me put a plug in. Actually, we are about to interview a lawyer for our show. We're actually interviewing her this week, and well, the show will go live maybe toward the end of the month. She's going to explain all of your rights, all of the rights of a dyslexic kid, and all of your rights as a parent. So that'll be a great episode to look to for really the legal advice for navigating the school system. But in terms of my experience as a parent, I guess we avoided the school system at first. We took her out of school and then we went to private schools. The main benefit of private school was that they were just much easier to work with without the bureaucracy. They just gave her the accommodations she needed. First piece of advice is you have to ask for what you think your child needs. And the worst that can happen is the school will say no. But if you
Mhm.
don't ask, you're never going to get it, right? They're
Yeah.
not going to just volunteer. I'm not a lawyer, but there are laws that I'm aware of where if your child is diagnosed with dyslexia, like if they have an actual official diagnosis, then your school is required legally to give them certain accommodations. And those accommodations are the sort of the devil's in the details as to what's worked out. And there's several ways to do this. Our daughter has what's called a 504 plan. It's a document, and then it's a way that her teachers have to approach things where she has in writing certain accommodations. And these accommodations include that she gets extra time on tests, so-called time and a half. So she gets 50% extra time, that she can use audiobooks, that she can type instead of handwrite. It's really important to get those accommodations your child needs and to get those in a written document between the school and yourself.
Got
Um,
it.
I guess second piece of advice is always introduce yourself to your child's teachers at the beginning of every school year. In elementary school, it's easy because they have maybe just one teacher, but reach out. In person is best if there's like a back to school night or something like that, or at least an email and say, hey, we're looking forward to this school year. I want to let you know that my child has dyslexia. And because of that, they will need certain accommodations. And also, maybe you say, okay, they tend to get frustrated by this, or they tend to struggle with this. And just so and then make sure you say, like, I'm looking forward to a great partnership this year, or something like that, right? So
Mhm.
that just make it clear from the beginning that you're a partner with the teacher, and then make sure the teacher is aware of your child's specific learning differences. And then
Mhm.
when they get into junior high or middle school and high school, do that with every teacher.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's
And from your experience, teachers are usually they're really accommodating, right?
Yeah, every teachers also want what is best for your child. When you talk to dyslexic people, you often hear horror stories of what some teachers have done. And it's really more out of ignorance than out of malice, I'm sure. These teachers are very well intentioned. They just don't necessarily have a lot of training about dyslexia. And also, they have to deal with a lot of other kids. And as long as you approach it in a constructive manner, then we've found that the teachers are all very accommodating. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Nick, can you please share about your platform? What do you do and how people can find you?
Sure. Thank you. My wife, Sonia, and I have a podcast and a YouTube channel. It's called Dyslexia Journey Support Your Kid. Search for Dyslexia Journey on YouTube or on the podcast platform of choice, so Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or if you use a different one, we're probably on that one too. We're on almost all the podcast platforms. The YouTube link it's at Parenting Dyslexia Journey is our handle. You can just search for it though in YouTube or your podcast player of choice. We are getting really close to our 100th episode.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And also, we have a series we call Dyslexic Voices, where we interview adults with dyslexia talking about their journeys, which is also very interesting and inspiring.
That, that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nick. It was really nice meeting you. And I just want to add too that every child is beautiful in its own way. And as you said,
Yeah.
I am fascinated like seeing kids having multiple strengths, like being neurotypical. I think sometimes I'm super boring because I'm seeing other kids who's like, man, you drew so well, or you're singing, or it's just the way brain works. It's so amazing to me. And just want to add one of the famous people that I know has dyslexia is Barbara Corcoran, right?
Mhm.
The Shark Tank host. I read her book and I was like, wow, I never realized, only I learned it through her book that she is dyslexic. I'm like, wow, this you could never tell. But
Mhm.
then it makes sense that she has other strengths, right? As you said, your daughter is compensating. That's like to me, it's just amazing how the brain works and how we're all unique in our own ways.
Yeah, it really is. I think that's a great point to emphasize. Even in our daughter's case, even now, she has just such great visual spatial skills. She's the one in our house who can find anything. Oh, I lost my phone. And she's, oh yeah, I saw it over here. She knows like exactly. It's this 3D spatial awareness that,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool. My middle daughter, I have three kids, so two girls and a son. So my middle daughter, we call her like a navigation in our family because she whenever we drive, she memorizes the streets so well. And within like second or third time, I'm still using GPS, but she
Right.
goes, "Oh, Mama, are we going to school or are we going this way?" I'm like, "You're so good at this." And at store, when we go to the store, like Target, for example, I was like, "Okay, Emily, take us to the toy section." But she's
Yeah,
like,
that's
right
great.
away, she cuts corners, she knows where to go. She's pretty cool with that too.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you guys do. And it's really cool to have a community where people can find you and find the resources that you guys provided. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.